Welcome everyone to the Year of the Child panel discussion. Thanks for coming out on this wet night for, I think, a very important discussion. It's hosted by the Graham Center for Public Service, and first off I want to thank the Graham Center, as always, for all the wonderful work they do and for hosting this event. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, the League of Women Voters, and my employer, the Gainesville Sun. My name is Nathan Crabbe. I'm the Sun's opinion and engagement editor, and I'll be moderating tonight's discussion. Rather than have me introduce the panelists, I'm going to let them introduce themselves so we can have as much time as possible for the discussion and for your questions. There should be cards going around that you can write questions on, and about at the halfway point, I will start going through those questions, so get them done by about the half-hour mark, and I'll get to as many as possible in the second half of the program. But first, without further ado, let's have our panelists introduce themselves, starting with Hector Sandoval.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Hector Sandoval. I am the principal investigator from the report on inequity in racial disparities in Alachua County. This is the report. This is the report, and this is something we present at the beginning of the year. And the report contains important documents, important disparities in terms of different dimensions of human well-being, and one of them is education. And just wanna mention some of the things we found in the report. We found that there is disparities in terms of achievement and performance. For example, in terms of performance, we see that with the exception of the Asian students in the county, the rest of the students are performing even lower in terms of reading and math compared to the state level students, to the peers in the state level. And well, one of the reasons behind these issues is, well, the county budget is restricted and there is low fund for education. And this is one of the factors behind these disparities. So that's one of the reasons I'm here to provide about some picture on these disparities.
I'm Brian Scarborough, and I'm working with a good group of volunteers on the tax that's going to be on the ballot this November. It's a half-cent sales tax, and it would go solely to fund infrastructure needs in our public schools in Alachua County. I'll share with you that I, like everyone in the room, I'm sure, am not the most ardent of taxing myself further. But I'll also share with you that as a product of the public schools and a father of two daughters in the back who are in the public schools presently, and after spending about a year of studying the infrastructure needs in the community, not just with schools, there's a dire and demonstrable need in our schools, and it's not due to any kind of mismanagement. It's not due to decisions made on the local level. It's due solely to the diminishment of funding from the state level to the tune of $168 million reduction in funding for infrastructure in Alachua County alone over the last 10 years. And so while there's nothing sexy about infrastructure, I get it. Replacing your roof is no fun. It has to be done, and now is the time we're asking voters, do we want to properly address our school needs, or do we want to let it get worse?
My name is Dorothy Thomas, and I am here with the Children's Trust. A lot of people need a little explanation of what the Children's Trust is. Essentially, the Children's Trust is designed to supplement what the schools are doing. It is a way to fund and to provide support for children for all the times that they're not in school. When they're too young to be in school, when they're in the after-school hours before their parents get home from work, in the summer, and also to address the type of things that schools don't address. There are additional needs for mental health supports, parenting supports, and all of the other types of things that children need in their life to be healthy and productive. We believe that this is a particularly good investment. I, like Brian, I'm not super excited about paying more taxes, but believe that this is the most cost-efficient way to prevent some of these problems from happening before they get out of control. The Children's Trust is a statutory creation. I just learned yesterday, believe it or not, that Florida is the only state in the country that has a statute authorizing a Children's Trust or a Children's Services Council. It is funded. It has to be funded by a property tax. It's not a huge amount of money. The average taxpayer or the average homeowner in Alachua County would pay about $37, and that $37 per household will bring back approximately $7 million for our children for the times that they're not in school.
Wow. Well, let's get into some of those issues that you just mentioned to start off. So, there is a lot of support locally for schools. I mean, the 1 mil has shown that. And there's a lot of different programs locally that are supportive of children. So I guess I want to know a little bit more about what the initiative that you support would do differently from those programs.
So one thing that's unique about the schools have obviously provided leadership for the kids in the school environment. But what Alachua County has never had is a comprehensive system of care outside of their school day. And this is the first opportunity we've had to unify everything from the little kids, the 0 to 5 kids, all the way up through when they graduate from high school outside of their school time, and provide a real strategic plan of how to deal with the issues that face children, to really assess the needs, figure out where there's duplication, figure out where there's gaps, and look at a long-term solution to what can be done to address these issues. A children's trust is governed by an independent board. It's 10 people. 5 of those spots are set spots: the superintendent of schools, a school board member, a county commissioner, the director of children and family services, and a juvenile court judge. The other 5 spots are left open for community members that represent the demographics of our community. And when you put all 10 people together in one unified system, it allows us to look at this in a way that we've never looked at it before. The other thing that's special about a children's trust is a lot of times money can be given and then taken away. If a children's trust is passed by voters, it is a permanent or a semi-permanent source of revenue for just children. It will last for 12 years, and then the voters can reauthorize it to go forward longer. But once that money is designated for children, it can't be diverted for other things. So it is a guaranteed $7 million every year to provide the type of programs that we currently can't afford to do.
So I guess I would ask something similar of you, Brian, and you kind of touched on this already, but maybe we can explore it a little bit further. For the tax fatigued local voter, that says, hey, I already passed the 1 mil and this sort of thing. What would you tell them in terms of, you've hit on a little bit of it maybe, but maybe kind of expand on it of why this particular need is so great that you'd be going to voters for?
Thank you. It's a great question. The 1 mil thankfully has passed. It was renewed at the last election, and it's important to note that goes solely to programming in schools, right? So that's your guidance counselor, that's your arts, that's your music. It's everything that makes school, right? And so we as a community thankfully have passed that. This is a separate initiative. This is a sales tax. It's a half cent. It would last for 12 years. It would raise somewhere in the neighborhood of 18, 19 million bucks a year, right? And it's going to go solely to infrastructure. And so when we talk about that, we're talking about roofs, HVAC, flooring, painting. And if you sum up the backlog of that, this was part of our study last year that we did in infrastructure, it's in the neighborhood of 17, 18 million bucks backlogged right now, okay? And we don't have the money to do it. On top of that, you'll add another $4.5, $5 million a year that will just continuously grow worse. Additionally, a vast majority of our elementary schools are overcrowded. We do have a need for greater capacity. We have 6,000 kids studying in 300 portables, which are not only expensive, they're not terribly safe. They're not hardened against tornadoes, hurricanes, all that kind of good stuff. And so in all of that, I've yet to mention that we can improve in technology in our schools, right? We can make them more energy efficient. We can do all these things to catch up with the rest of the world in terms of education, but to do it, you need money. And so when the budget gets cut to the tune of $168 million, I'm a business person, right? And if this were my business and my top line was shaved by $168 million over a 10-year period of time, you would have to do something in business like close down a branch or 20 or cut a product line or cut expenses. Well, in public schools, you can't do that. In fact, we have higher enrollment now than we did 3 years ago, a greater demand, and we're being asked to now address issues of safety that 10 years ago we never even thought about having to address, right? And so with that top line cut, it truly is. I mean, there's no plan B here. There's no parachute. We either address it by creating a new source of revenue, or the problem gets systemically worse. And so that's what is different than the 1 mil, and that's why the need is so great right now.
So, Hector, you brought the racial inequity report. I also brought it as well. How many people in the audience have read the racial inequity in Alachua County report? Most of the folks here are about, maybe 30%, 40% of the folks here. So I would recommend all the folks who have not read the report, as well as those who might be watching on the streaming feed at home, to read it. I actually even created one of those bit links, so you can more easily find it online. It's bit.ly/Alachua County Inequity if you haven't read the report and want a copy of it. So, the report goes into a lot of things in terms of poverty in our community, in terms of the quality of things like the housing in our community, opportunities for employment and so forth. So how, from what you see in your research, does education play a role in lifting folks in this community out of poverty, or does it? Where would you see the role of education in doing that?
Yeah, I mean, education is actually one of the main conclusions in the report is like we need to give a lot of investment in education. Education is important to break this poverty trap. It's not that we, hope that education will just lift people out of poverty from one day to another one. But this is to break this cycle that goes from one generation to another one. And what we really want is like this education will open opportunities to have better employment, will provide like the community, the labor in the community, higher skills, better skills to have access to better jobs, and of course to have access to higher wages and salaries. So this is important, and it's important to break this poverty cycle, but it's also important to have a well-educated community. In general, there is also positive spillover effects, not only in terms of economics, but also in terms of like the social culture and activities that goes around, and that's also very important to notice.
Okay. Maybe, Dorothy, we can explore that a little bit more from you. I mean, I personally consider, addressing these disparities to be a community priority. But, for someone who's not living in poverty and says, well, why should I support an initiative like yours? I mean, what benefit does it have for someone who's not directly benefiting from the programs?
Well, I think there's a couple of different reasons. I mean, one of the most general reasons is in order for us to have a profitable community, to have an educated workforce, to have economic development, and to bring new companies and economic growth here, it is terribly important that we are turning out children that are well prepared and functional. And that is both a function of the schools, but it's also a function of these broader social, emotional concepts. I also think another thing that's very important that links kind of our initiative to the stuff that was in the report is one of the biggest areas of disparities is in the first 5 years of life. There are so many children that hit our schools not ready to go, not on the same level as other children in their class. And a Children's Trust could provide some serious funding for really innovative and exciting new early learning programs. And whether you are a child that's receiving this new funding for early learning programs because maybe you haven't had it in the past, or you have a child who is adequately prepared for kindergarten and ready to go, it has a huge impact. Our teachers have become so much more than teachers. They have to make sure kids are fed. They have to make sure kids know how to use a fork. They have to make sure kids know what their last name is and sit in a chair and walk in a line and deal with all of the issues that relate to kids who have not had the adequate preparation and the adequate supports that they need to function in a school setting. So whether your child is getting those extra supports or just in a classroom with children who need those extra supports, it has an impact on you and it has an impact on your community for the long-term growth of our community. Certainly, if we're going to bring new employers and innovative people to our community, we need to be able to tell them that they will be in a thriving community that has all of this type of support in place to continue to move forward.
Okay. think I've been accused of being a tax and spend liberal as editorial writer of the Sun, so I'm going to put on more of the hat of the skeptical taxpayer in this question to you, Brian. I guess as a taxpayer, what kind of assurances would you give someone that the money from the initiative that you support would be spent in a responsible way?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with the ballot language that, of course, you'll be asked to vote upon, and you'll be able to see in advance, and so it'll define where the money goes. In addition to that, there will be a citizen oversight panel that makes sure the money goes that way. As a means of communicating this to the voters, we will be showing exactly, here's the schools, here's the list, here's what's going to get funded, and if we're smart, and I hope we are, we will be posting those signs at those schools, so when those parents and grandparents drop their kids off, they can see that, oh, you mean that kindergarten classroom at Idlewild that I guarantee flooded today and yesterday, we're going to fix that finally? Terrific. We're going to expand that library, or we're going to make the East Side High School classroom actually have air conditioning. Those kinds of things, they'll be visible. And the nice thing about, the sales tax is number one, the school board can bond it, and so it doesn't have to be, you don't have to wait to collect it. They can begin the projects with that bonding capacity and the funding assured. But the other part that's nice about it is, roughly 30% of it will come from those people who aren't necessarily residents of Alachua County. They're coming to a Gator game, or they're happen to study here at UF, or they're in town for Gator Nationals. They will be helping us fund our schools, which is nice. And so, I would argue to them that there is going to be ample oversight, and it's going to be demonstrable. This isn't something that, we're going to hide the fact. We're going to be able to point and see that air conditioning, it's working. That's because we replaced it. It's going to be fairly easy to submit to them that we did what we say we would.
So just to follow up with you a little bit, obviously, since the Parkland shooting, there's been a big focus on what they call school hardening, I guess, of improving safety in the facilities of schools. Is that the kind of thing that might be a potential? I know that there's a question of the amount of state money being provided for that being adequate enough. Is this something that we might be able to use this money for?
Absolutely, and I think it's important to note that to credit the school board and the facilities folks, I mean, the security component to this isn't a reaction to Parkland. That was already on the list of improvements, right? But to your point, yes, I mean, this year, they started session in Tallahassee by saying we're going to increase funding, and the real funding increase after Parkland ate up the increase to go to mental health and the mandated security audits and improvements, which aren't enough to fund what, shocker, what they said you need to do, is about 47 cents, right? And so we're still well beyond or behind where we were 10 years ago on a per student funding basis. But yes, to your point, in order to make the schools safer, I remember reading in the Sun right after Parkland, a well-intentioned gentleman wrote an editorial that perhaps we should install doors in every classroom that would open to the schoolyard. And the first thing I thought of was my daughter Leland's classroom at J.J. Finley, which happens to be on the second floor. So I'm not sure where that door would open, but I really am not interested in Leland having access to that door for a myriad of reasons. But the point being, we all have great ideas as to how to harden our schools, but the local subcontractor that's doing this for free, we need the dollars to do it.
So I guess let's get into some more specifics. So in terms of, and I guess you said that there are going to be lists. So we'll have actual specifics in terms of all the projects, but in terms of the types of things being done. I mean, you mentioned Idlewild. I mean, we're talking about roof repairs. We're talking about new facilities for overcrowded schools. Give me a couple more examples.
Yeah, and so you have to first. I mean, and I'm not. I can barely build a birdhouse. Let me just tell you that right now. So I'm not speaking from a position of authority when it comes to construction. Right? I insure a bunch of them, but I'm not really sure what they do. But You have to address the AC systems that have to be replaced. You have to re-roof what needs to be re-roofed. But from a capacity standpoint, ideally, we wouldn't have those 6,000 kids in portables, which are expensive to lease and move and maintain, and they're lousy with energy. And so, yeah, addressing capacity, whether that's expanding existing schools, building a new school where growth is demanding it, frankly, you have to have funding to do that. And so I think it's important because as a public, who has seen the lottery come and go and new money not really happen, just get shifted around, they want to see that there's a list, and they want to see that there's accountability. And I think that's good stewardship. And so we're aware of that, and that's going to be there. And I think it's also notable that, this isn't something that's going to go to, build one new school on the west side. This is going to benefit every school in the district because every school in the district needs this. And so I think everyone will see lift as a result of this.
Let me ask you something similar, Dorothy. So first off, I guess maybe give us some examples of the types of programs that this might fund. And to Brian's point about benefiting the wide variety of students, we'll give me some examples of things that might hit different communities around here.
Great. So first of all, keep in mind that this is going to be overseen by an independent board. So I can't tell you specifically what the independent board is going to give the thumbs up to. So I can only give you examples. I just want to be clear on that. I don't want to make promises I can't keep. But what I can tell you is if you look at the 8 existing CSCs, the other ones are throughout Florida, you can compare what's happening in those communities and what's happening on a statewide level, and you can see the counties that have CSCs really start to move the needle in a way that's quicker than all of the other ones. I was in a meeting this morning. As we were leaving the meeting, we were talking about how people assume that all of these different agencies that benefit children communicate, but they really don't all communicate. There's all these individual silos. And you might have a mental health provider that works on this project, and you might have an after-school program that works on this project, and you might have an early learning program that works on this project. But there's not a lot of cross-pollination. There's not a lot of cross-communication. And so one thing that just as a general oversight capacity is all of a sudden we will have a way to pull all of those different agencies into the room in the same place to start thinking about how they work together. Examples of the types of areas that other CSCs have focused on, and based on the polling that we have done, seem to be priorities here, include the highest priority seems to be early education and kindergarten preparedness. I think anyone can argue that that is a wise investment. There are studies, kind of the generally accepted studies show there's about a $1 to $6 return on every dollar that you put in on early education. Some studies show it as high as $14. Probably it's somewhere in between those two. So I think early education is going to be a big focus area. Another area that other counties have really expanded upon is a quality improvement and access improvement for after-school programming. There's a lot of after-school programming throughout the county. Not all of the after-school programming is good. It's not all accomplishing objectives. So if you have kids as a captive audience for 6 or 8 hours of the day, we should be using that time wisely, and we should be using the money that funds that efficiently. One of the things that I really like about the way the statute is set up to create a CSC, our case, the Children's Trust, is all of the programs, they have to be data-driven. There has to be oversight. There has to be accountability. It's similar to if it was any other government body, the records and the books and all of the way that the money is spent will be open for public viewing. And so it creates this new way of thinking about how we fund children's programs. And I think we have demonstrated, the county commissioners have been able to fund a Children's Services Advisory Board, which is kind of a predecessor to this Children's Trust, focused on 0 to 5-year-olds. And what we have seen with that existing body is that there is this new element of cooperation and collaboration that has been required in the proposals that have been submitted. So, for example, we currently have a home visiting program where it's going to start in, I think, about 2 weeks, where any mom that has a baby or adopts a baby anywhere in Alachua County, whether you're rich or poor or live in, this part of town or that part of town or a rural part or in Gainesville or wherever, that you have the option to have a nurse come into your house about a week after you go home from the hospital and do a basic check of the living conditions and the circumstances around your baby. Make sure the baby's thriving. Make sure that you're not having any nursing issues. Make sure that there's no postpartum issues. Make sure that there's safe environment, all of that kind of stuff. And then that RN will serve as a connector if you need additional services. Maybe you're having postpartum issues, or maybe there's some other issue you need. We'll connect you to other services that can provide whatever already exists in this community to help you out, whether it's counseling or formula or whatever. So those type of collaborations on that project, for example, we have Shands and North Florida and all of the midwives and the adoption facilitators and Healthy Start all collaborating together to provide that service. That's pretty amazing to get those entities to work together on a single program. It's not that easy. And so those type of new collaborative programs, I think, will really change things. And it really shows how, an issue like postpartum, it doesn't discriminate based on race or class or anything else. It's across the board. There are some families that are going to need extra supports, and then there's some things that are universal. And so I think this balances the two needs. I think I kind of derailed off your question.
No, I liked it. So one of the things that you said that stuck out at me is this return on investment for funding for early childhood education and development. Hector, maybe you can speak a little to that. I mean, what has your research shown kind of in terms of some of the needs that there might be in terms of the early childhood years, and what might be some benefits that investment might affect some of the other measures in terms of some of the things that are happening in the criminal justice system that you measured later in life?
Yeah, actually, I mean, I believe that early childhood development, that's actually a good way to invest the money. Actually, in terms of the disparities, which is what we found, these disparities, these racial disparities, it's not that the gap will close with the years. The gap is just increasing, and it's because since the kids are born, you start to see these disparities, and these disparities comes in the development of these cognitive skills and non-cognitive skills, and all of this is part of this. So I welcome all these programs that will help to put the floor even for everyone in terms of development these skills. And again, something to point out is, well, we should expect this to be a long-term investment. I mean, it's something we need to, really observe how it's developing, and again, over the time, we will see what is best doing. I mean, it's not that we have, research will tell you it's good to focus on the development on early childhood development, but there is no conclusive evidence like, well, this is the formula to do that. I mean, there will be a lot of, and something that I like from the proposal is like, well, there will be research on data-driven, so you will be able to analyze and see what is the things that are really working in this community in particular. So I think that's something great and for what we're doing here. Yeah.
Thank you. Has audience members been filling out any question cards? Did you guys get handed out some question cards? Haven't gotten any question cards? Okay.
There's some over there if you want.
Yeah, maybe pass those around because I'm happy to start asking questions in a moment. Before, I guess, while people are filling out the question cards, and I can say real quick, TJ from the Office of the Alachua County Supervisor of Elections Office is in here and asked me to remind everybody that this fall's ballot is going to be a long one. We have the Constitutional Revision Commission right now that could put a number of ballot initiatives on this November. There's going to be a number of offices, including Governor, U.S. Senate, some of our local offices for the legislature on this ballot. So what the Supervisor of Elections is recommending is folks vote early. Specifically, if possible, vote by mail. And I think that's actually a pretty smart recommendation in terms of some of these more complicated ballot initiatives, to actually do the research to find out a little bit more about them. And hopefully tonight is the start of folks finding a little bit more about doing a little more research on the local ballot initiatives here. So If you have any questions about getting a ballot by mail, you can call the supervisor elections officer. TJ is right here. So after the event today, if anyone wants to ask him, he can fill you in on the details. Okay, let's turn to questions from the audience. Okay, well, I guess this is just a question from the audience about the audience. How many here tonight are presently educators or former educators? Okay, so we have a very educated crowd of educators here tonight. Here's a question. Can these initiatives be co-marketed to voters so they don't inadvertently compete with each other? Ideas. Invest in our children, invest in our community, vote yes to children's trust and school infrastructure. I mean, this is a good question in terms of, I guess I'll be honest with you, that's a fear of mine. The Sun hasn't formally endorsed either of these initiatives, but we're certainly supportive of measures that put children in the best position to succeed. And I guess there is the worry that having both these on the ballot at once, one might negate the other. You have any thoughts from either of you on how to prevent that from happening?
I remember distinctly when we first started the conversation last year about infrastructure that at my office, the Dorothys, that's an affectionate term, not a pejorative term. Yeah. We got together and we talked about it. And I didn't know anything at that point because I didn't know that I would be doing this now. But we talked about, well, what if we just did a combined initiative? And the reason that they're bifurcated is for infrastructure by statute, it has to be a sales tax, right? And for the Children's Services Trust, it has to be property taxes. And so this was not our cooked up idea that it'd be funded to two of them and see if we can fool you. It's by statute that it's that way. But I would argue that this was kind of a first step in co-marketing this, and the two are certainly linked in that we're talking about kids, and we're both very hopeful that next year or this November proves to be a watershed event for the future of our kids in the community.
Yes, what he said. See, we're working together already. I think it's always a challenge, and it's hard to avoid that we're going to be on the same ballot. They had the 1 mil last year. We didn't want to compete with that. They're going to have the one mil in 2 more years. We don't want to compete with that. So we're either going to be on the ballot with this or on the ballot with the 1 mil. And we felt like strategically this was a better choice than before or after. And I think we've done a pretty good job of working together. And in some ways we can use the manpower and the army of people that are going to be getting the message out to each other's advantage to make sure that kids is on everybody's minds. Well,
and just from an editorial comment, and since you're the editor, Nathan, I can say this. Editorial page editor. Sorry, I didn't want to give you a promotion, right? Anytime, just word to the wise, if you read about tax cuts from the state level, just know that something's getting squeezed, right? And in this case, the somethings are all, pint-sized shaped people like my 2 kids in the back.
I like that line. I'm going to use that. So, while we're talking about roadblocks, I wrote a column with you guys a couple weeks ago about this new state requirement. There might be an audit.
You were telling me a little bit that there's some uncertainty about that still, but maybe you can inform people. Is that something that I think that the concern was getting this all done before the ballot measure. You still haven't had any clarity on when that's going to happen.
Yeah, and so for those of you who don't know, there was an item inserted on page 86 or so of a 170-page, basically a tax bill, the bill that accompanies the budget that says here's where the money goes, and these are the days in which we'll have no sales tax due to the hurricane or back to school or something like that, right? So right in the middle, a little snippet says, by the way, if you're a community and you want to seek some kind of sales tax, you got to get audited by the state, and we got to say your process is okay first. And by the way, you got to have that done 60 days in advance. So that was a fun surprise. You know, and as I told Nathan, I mean, I'm not a tinfoil hat guy, but at some point you got to conclude that someone is out to get you. But to answer your question, there has been a conversation with that office of the state and to talk about, can we get this audit done in time? And you know, the schools, by the way, every couple of years go through roughly 8 different audits. So this, I guess, will be number 9. But we will work diligently to meet that new mandate.
Okay. So here's a question from a retired educator in the audience wanting to know why weren't educators more involved with the creation of these initiatives, I guess. Were they? I guess would be the question. Were they? How are they involved? Are they involved? Obviously, you guys have been kind of working hand in hand with local school folks, right, and kind of figuring out this. But the Children's Trust, do you have some educators?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, this whole initiative really grew out of, so Dorothy Benson, who's sitting on the first row, and I have been very active in the SWAG community for years. And this whole Children's Trust idea came out of our work with the Child Center, which is a new early learning center that's going to be opening June 7th. You're welcome to come to the ribbon cutting. And it is going to really focus on trying to bring families with a lot of disparities up to into a child care system to really get them prepared and ready for kindergarten and give them some opportunities that maybe they haven't had before. And as we began to delve into the world of early childhood education, we realized that there wasn't enough funding, and so we started exploring options and looked into what other places were doing, and that's kind of how this whole initiative evolved. But certainly, we were not doing it alone. We have the expertise of folks like the Zucker Center, who are national experts on early learning, and through them, we have worked with the Department of Education here at UF. We have a number of teachers that have been involved in this. We have spoken to PTAs. We have talked to parents. We have none of this makes sense if the people that are dealing with children on a regular basis don't think it makes sense. And so we have engaged them at every step. We've had 2 big community forums where there were a lot of teachers that attended, and we certainly seek your input. I mean, that's why we're doing things like this, is because we want it to be responsive to the needs of people who deal with children and understand children and know about children's needs.
And I do want to mention that every school has been surveyed with regard to infrastructure needs in this, and obviously we have 2 sitting school board members here, the superintendent, the former superintendent, and a bunch of sitting administrators, and so the need is plain. It is just there.
Okay. Here's a question for you, Brian. Heard from many people concerned regarding the infrastructure tax. How will this money be used to address racial inequities? Will schools on the east side get a new facility while will schools on the east side get a new air conditioning while the west side gets a new school?
Well, I mean, where you put schools, as I understand it, and again, let me just put the caveat down that I am not in the school placement business, right? But it's my understanding that where you place schools is governed by concurrency, and where there's, the need for the number of behinds that will go in those seats, right? And so I'll say that. And so I don't pretend to understand all the nuances of where schools are placed and how, but I believe that's how it's done. In terms of where the work will be done, it's going to be everywhere. And I would argue that, if you've got a school that might happen to be on the east side, and as a lifelong resident of Alachua County, I do think it bears mentioning that I think we are now more sophisticated to know that that's a nuanced term when it comes to schools. I went to Terwilliger Elementary, and while that does not sit on the east side of Alachua County, the free and reduced lunch population is far higher there than it was when I went there, because the populations that now are going to Terwilliger are different, right? Neighborhoods have moved. And so, I like to think of it more in terms of will all of the kids in our school system benefit from this? And the answer is without question, yes. All schools will benefit from this. And by contrast, all schools and all kids will suffer if this doesn't pass.
Dorothy, this one's for you. Would prenatal care fall under the Children's Trust activities? It talks about toxic stress impacting child development before birth.
Yes, I definitely think that that's something. A number of the agencies that address early childhood issues also address the prenatal year time. And, I can't tell you specifically how that would fall in there, but absolutely it is something that we're taking into effect and into account. I think it's really important that you get to a mom before the baby is born, because it's not like you have 9 bad months and then on the day that the baby is born, magical trumpets start playing and all of a sudden your life changes and you go from a difficult existence to a good existence. And so I think it is extremely important to connect with new parents or parents even of existing children while they are anticipating their first child or their next child, and really make sure that you have a system of care in place as the mom is pregnant, so that when the baby actually arrives, you already have the services in place and the needs met.
So, Hector, your study both identified education and employment as the big areas that we should focus on locally, right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's two of the main conclusions from the study, is to focus on education, and the other one is to focus on employment. And while education is just instrumental to elevate the skills of the population and to break this poverty cycle I was mentioned before, but we also need the jobs. I mean, we need the jobs for everyone, because this will just lift everyone from poverty.
So one of the reasons I was asking that was to ask you, Dorothy, and I guess I'm kind of curious, I'm not sure of the answer to this, so please do inform me. What about job training type stuff? Are those the type of things that could fall under the initiative?
I think that one of the things that we definitely need to develop in this community is better paths for children who are not necessarily headed to a 4-year college or a community college. We definitely need to improve our vocational training and the options that are available for children who may take that path, because certainly even without a college degree, you can have a very productive career in life with a good vocation that doesn't necessarily require a 4-year degree. And so that may be one of the areas, again, dependent upon what the needs assessment shows and what the areas of this community deems to be most important. That is definitely something that could fall within that. And one other thing that I would like to connect to what he just said, one of the biggest barriers to employment for our lowest income individuals is childcare. Childcare is insanely expensive. It has surpassed how much it costs to send a child to college in a lot of states, Florida being one of them. And you can't get a job if you don't have childcare, and you can't pay for childcare unless you have a job. And so one of the big focuses of what we've been working on with the existing advisory board is trying to reduce some of those barriers to employment, and childcare is absolutely, childcare and transportation are probably the two biggest barriers. And we believe that those go hand in hand. And what we're doing at the Child Center, as an example, is very much focused on trying to get people employed and giving them a way to not have to put their child in an unsafe environment just so that they can go to work. It is one of the biggest indicators of child abuse is if a child is with a non-biological adult, a boyfriend or a neighbor or a whoever, that is not safe. And so that is a huge important thing, especially with our youngest children, and also for school-age kids for after the school hours.
So I guess this is a question for both you, Dorothy, and Brian as well. Since education is a paramount duty of the state, is there a risk in taking on local funding for these needs? Could the legislature decide we don't need more from them since we are taking care of needs?
Nah. I think they're trying that. No, I don't want to be flippant with that question. I guess it's feasible to construct a reality in which they would do less. I'd have to noodle on that pretty hard as to what that would look like. They literally, it was 2008. The schools used to be able to levy 2 mills, and they just said can't do that anymore. It's 1.5 mills, and even if you want to ask for more and your community would say yes, we ain't gonna let you ask. And did they replace it through some other funding source? Y'all know the answer. From 2011 to 2014, they they stopped funding infrastructure altogether. It all went to charter schools. And then in 2015, they said, tell you what, we'll turn the spigot back on. You guys split it. Split it even. There's 650 charter schools. There's 3,600 public schools. Split it even. So, pardon my skepticism as to that's something that's going to keep me up tonight. It's a shame, but it's a reality, and so you got to be a grown-up with that. You can't get mad and shout at the windmill. It is what it is. The question we're going to put to voters is, do we want to do anything about it?
I think with the Children's Trust, one of the things I like about it is local dollars, and it's controlled by local people. And although I can't say that the state is, or the national level, is not going to change their funding sources, I don't think it would be as a result of us having a Children's Trust. I don't think they could pick out just the couple of counties that have children's services councils. I mean, who knows what they'll do, but you never know. But I don't anticipate them singling out counties that provide local funding. But what I can say definitively is the $7 million that the Children's Trust will raise will stay in Alachua County. It will be controlled by people from Alachua County, and no one at the state level will have any say as to what we do with it. So once it is passed, it is ours and they can't change it. So I think that, I feel like a lot of times at the national level and the state level, you feel so unable to control outcomes. I feel like at the local level, you can make a much greater impact on what happens. And so that is one of the things. Again, this is protected funding. This is $7 million every year that can only go to Alachua County children, period. And to me, that's a great deal of comfort.
Again, I'm just the moderator, but if I might share my opinion, you're also voting on other stuff this fall too, including the people in the legislature that make those decisions. So, maybe that's something to take into consideration.
The Children's Trust proposed budget is rather modest. Now, this is a good question. You mentioned quite a few different things, from early childhood to job training, a bunch of different stuff. Should the emphasis and goals be narrowed down to inspire a successful outcome? Example, pre-K/K through second grade readiness. I guess, why not focus on something just like that rather than this all expansive?
So one of the things that we have done is we've taken, so St. Lucie County has an existing Children's Services Council, and I think that they were created in 1990. Does that sound right to you, Dorothy? I think it's 1990. And their budget is $8 million a year. Ours is $7 million a year. And we have looked at what their priorities are and thought about possibly modeling ours after that. I think we've put together kind of a draft budget that we could propose. And I think that you're right. We can't solve every problem. But I think if you take 4 or 5 main areas, the areas that we have heard expressed the most are early learning, mental health supports or social emotional development, after school programming, and vocational programming. Those seem to be things that come up over and over again. So if you take a couple of, that's 4 or 5 priority areas and you really focus on those, and we probably would not roll all of it. It's not like in year 1, all of a sudden there's going to be all of those programs that exist. We're going to have to be strategic. We're going to have to start with what we are working on already. We already have an advisory board that's focused on the 0 to 5. So probably the first step would be to expand that 0 to 5 programming to make it more county-wide and comprehensive. So that's probably step number 1. And then the needs assessment will dictate where the greatest areas of need are with the other kind of categories of funding. And we would probably roll those out, in year 2, maybe you focus on the next area. In year 3, you add the next area. We're not crazy enough to think that all of a sudden on day 1 you get $7 million and you have 15 fabulous programs that are up and running, because there's not a way to quality control that. And so I think that, to your point, yes, we'll have to be slow and calculated and make sure that rather than doing lots of things not very well, we pick areas and prioritize and get them up and running and functional and funded, and then expand beyond that.
So, Brian, I think you mentioned the statistic, but it bears repeating. Has been estimated how much of the revenue raised will come from visitors outside of Alachua County, and what will be the annual impact to Alachua County residents' pocketbooks? Example is the estimated amount the average consumer will pay will be additional, that will pay on an additional, costs of this?
Yeah, so 30% is the guesstimate as to how much of it'll be raised by folks who are, from outside of the county, whether they're visiting or what have you. I think the number is $58 per household is what the estimated impact of having another half cent to your sales tax would cost the average household. It is notable, I think, that every county contiguous to Alachua County is already at 7 cents. We're at 6.5, so they've already exercised a local option to fund something in those counties. So believe it or not, we're actually lower tax when it comes to sales tax. Who knew? But I think that it's not a competitive thing necessarily, but I think it bears mentioning that they've already done that. And so $58, obviously, if you spend more, you're gonna feel more of that. There's a $5,000 cap on major expenses, after which they don't charge it anymore. It's not charged on food. It's not charged on medicine. Normal exemptions to a sales tax.
Dorothy, how about for the property tax increase? What does that mean for the average?
So the median household will pay about $37 per year. The 70% of all households will pay under $56.
70% of households will pay.
70% will pay under $56, or right at $56. Maybe it was 56 and change, but in that range.
Okay. So this mentions Head Start. It says it was developed and proven to work. Will that come back? I think it
Head Start exists. There are 640 Head Start spots in Alachua County.
640.
640.
So are you suggesting that this is something that might need to be expanded upon?
Head Start is fully federally funded, and I don't think that local dollars would, I don't think it would be allowed to fund local dollars into that. Now, what it could do is augment, Head Start is a school day length program. Certainly, it could augment the care that those children receive after the Head Start day finishes. It could provide additional supports and services around Head Start, but I don't think, by the way, if I understand it correctly, I'm not a Head Start expert, but as I understand Head Start, that is a federal calculation, and Alachua County, by the current calculations, is allowed 640 spots funded by federal dollars, period, the end. The federal government administers it. There's no wiggle room there.
So this will be the last question, then we'll maybe allow everyone can maybe make some closing comments. How more can we educate parents on the importance of early childhood?
I think that's the very type of thing that a children's trust can do. I think that there are so many children, so many parents that don't understand how important basic early childhood functions are. Things like serve and return, things like how your brain is developing, how to parent a 1-year-old, that it's important to talk and sing and make eye contact with a baby. I think that you could roll things out through pediatricians' offices. You could roll things out through religious organizations. I think having money to develop materials to make it easily accessible to parents is the very type of programming that a children's trust can accomplish.
Okay. Well, let's start with Hector, and everyone can make some closing comments.
Yeah, I think in terms of the racial disparities, again, that we found, I want to mention that these two different, what they are trying to do is complementary. It's true that one thing is we want these programs to support the families, to support the children, and that's very important, especially because they are focusing on this early childhood development, which in my view, and there's been a lot of research done on this that shows that it's very important to focus on that. But it's also true that, the environment, and there is studies showing how the environment, the physical environment surrounding the students is also important for their development, for them to learn and to improve their skills and develop these skills over time. So I wanna make a final statement saying that, this is complementary things. So it's not that there's like a overlap in this. They are aimed for the children, but these are things that will help and complement each other.
So, and I've said this in a couple different forums, but at its purest sense, I think a demonstration of a community's values is how they treat their children, right? And so, if you want to impress upon a child that education is very important, you shouldn't put them in a kindergarten classroom that floods. You shouldn't stick them in a high school environment. Ask them to pay attention to science, because science is very important to the new world economy. And the eye wash station hasn't worked in 10 years, and the AC doesn't work. I think kids can kind of feel the vibe as to, well, we're saying one thing, but we're kind of meaning another. And we talk a lot in the business community about economic development. These kids are your future doctors and nurses and teachers and police officers and bank tellers, and you want all those people to get it right. I would argue you need to put a little investment towards making sure that they have the foundation where they can hope to get it right on your behalf. And so that's economic development, and that's demonstrating what our community really values, in my opinion.
Ken Cornell is one of our big champions on the county commission, and one thing that he has said is, think about what our community would have looked like had we done this 20 years ago, and think about what it's going to look like in 20 years if we don't do this. We know that there's disparities. We know that there's problems. We know that the schools can't do it alone. And if we don't do this now, it's going to continue to get worse, and it's going to be more expensive, and we're going to need it even more than we need it now. This is not a huge amount of money to make a big investment in children, and I think that the return on investment shows we have limited resources. We cannot pay for everything, but these type of programs make a difference later on. And if we invest the money now, we're going to save money later. One thing that I would encourage you to do, so Dorothy Benson and I do this completely as volunteers. We don't get paid by anybody. We spend time away from our families to do this. We have no ulterior motive. We do it because we believe in it, and we think it's going to change the face of this community. And I would encourage every one of you in this room, if this is something you believe in and something you support, please help us do this. We're only 2 people. We need volunteers. We need people to go hand out yard signs and tell people to vote for this and speak at your bridge club or your Sunday school class or your whatever. We need to run this like a campaign. There is so much work to be done, and we believe that this is a true grassroots community and a campaign, and we want to see this pass, but we can't do it by ourselves. So if this is something you believe in, we have a website. It's on the flyers that you got, the handouts that you got. We have a Facebook page. You can get our phone numbers. You can call us. You can email us. I'm sure Brian feels the same way. We need help. We need support. We need an army of people to go out and make the average population that probably has never thought about this care about it and understand that it's important and believe that it will help our community.
Well, I appreciate that's a great note to end on. Thank you both for your work on these initiatives and the other things you do in the community, and thank you, Hector, for helping bring light to some of these disparities in our community through your research. And just to reiterate what you said in terms of getting out to vote, we have some pretty shameful sometimes voter turnout numbers. They're a little bit better in the fall than some of our spring elections, but they still could be better than that. So I just hope that everyone, no matter what you vote, how you vote on these initiatives, quite frankly, I just hope more people turn out to vote and at least take an active interest in these issues. So thank you all for being here and braving the elements, and thanks again to the Graham Center for hosting this event. Good night.